My guest on today's video is the master fundraiser Rahul Moodgal. Rahul has spent 25 years as a fundraiser across long-only strategies, hedge funds, fund of funds, startups, and nonprofits. Collectively, he has raised and helped raise $94 billion for firms since 2005. Rahul started his career in the industry at Powerhouse TT International and later joined the Children's Investment Fund, where he led the marketing effort that raised $20 billion in just 3.5 years. Rahul has also been responsible for the largest India fundraise and the largest sector fundraise in history. Today, our conversation covers lessons learned about networking after an extensive career in the industry. Let's jump right in and get started. So my question for you today is, to what degree do you owe networking and building relationships has helped you and has helped towards your success so far?
I think all of it is about human relationships. I literally think that's all it is, and it's the ability to interact with human beings and speak to them, and understand who they are, where they come from, what their motives are, what interests them, what they're scared of. I think that's literally all this is about. It's not even about having luckily I've been able to work for some of the best investors in the world, so that has obviously helped. But I think just having the ability to connect with people is really what has been behind me achieving things that I never thought I'd achieve. It's that simple. It's nothing else really.
So I would say that it's a big part. So has there been any mentor that you specifically remember who's pushed you and nudged you in the right direction?
Yep, so Mark Williams, who was the former co-head of FX at Goldman Sachs, who was the partner at TT International, the first shop that I worked at in finance. He hired me and he taught me everything that I know. I owe him everything, really. I'm grateful to him, and I still am grateful to him, and I still stay in touch with him and tell him how much I appreciate him, and always reminding him of things that have happened and how I've responded to them based on the teachings that he gave me. So he's the one who's taught me everything. He would say lots of things and they've always stuck with me. Never be an arsehole. You meet everyone twice. It's not acceptable to lose a client because of bad service, but it's fine to lose them because of bad performance. Really to read and read and read everything again and again and again, because you read something, you do the work, and then you just send it out. And he taught me a lot of things, and just attention to detail, making every client, investor, prospect feel loved and like they're the only person that matters. And you're the biggest ambassadors for your firm are your existing clients, because they're invested with you, so they believe in you and they like what you do, but they're also people who may potentially leave and go somewhere else. So it plays into the teaching, treat everyone well because you're likely to meet them again. So he taught me so many things. And there was him, and then he had a gentleman who worked for him in New York called David Ballon. And together they have taught me everything, really. Mark was my direct boss, and David was very, very influential in mentoring me, particularly in how to present, how to write English. He was absolutely obsessed with detail on everything, to the point that it was painful, but it was good pain because the results always proved to be better than you would expect them to be.
Got it. So I have one question relating to that. It looks like you're still in touch with people who've helped you along the way, especially ones who you respect so much. So during a time like COVID, and even now when a lot of communication has moved online versus in person, so are there any specific tips or advice that you'd give when trying to maintain relationships in the world where there's so much social media now and online is preferred over in person? So how do you build that connection and maintain it?
It's a really good question. I think that everyone is going digital and I'm going more analog, because number one, it's a differentiator, and number two, nothing can replace seeing people face to face in person. I remember the first trip I took after COVID was January 2021. January 2022, I should say. I met up with so many clients and I didn't realize, and neither did they, and we'd be talking, then we'd go, it's 1:30 in the morning because we just hadn't seen each other for so long. We had dinner, then we had drinks, and we kept on talking, and there was just so much to catch up on. So I don't think you can ever replace that face to face, and you're more likely to be less aware of time when you're with someone face to face than you are on Zoom because you're watching the time because you probably have another Zoom to go to after it, or you have something else to do. And I think you just have that connection where people are going to talk to you more openly about things when you see them face to face. I still think there is value in Zoom because it's a very good way to be time efficient. If there's a lot of meetings you need to have in a day or a lot of people you need to catch up with, you can do 30 or 60-minute slots back to back without having to travel around to see different people. So I use it for that a lot, particularly where I've got shorter meetings I need to do. I think it's very good from an investor's perspective to meet a universe of opportunity or managers or strategies that they can sort of work through, and then they can determine after that who they're going to physically go and meet. And I think for me, I always try and do a Zoom before we have a investor come to our offices so I can sort of catch up with them on their organization, who they are, what they're doing, how they're thinking. So we can get rid of all the background noise that we need to get rid of before we get into the details when they come to our office and do things face to face. During COVID, I found it very, very useful to have Zoom in the sense that it allowed me to stay in touch with a lot of people very efficiently. I was able to bring together groups of people very easily, which you can't always do in a physical space, in a certain location. So from that perspective, it's very, very useful. And I think you can achieve a lot. The thing that I'm always conscious of on Zoom, when you're speaking to someone face to face, you're not conscious about how you look. I'm sitting here now going, oh no, my head is shiny. This is this. When you're on a Zoom, you're always conscious about those things. You can always see yourself. So when you're with someone face to face, you don't think about those things as much.
Yeah, that makes sense because I'm doing the exact same thing right now, just looking at myself and making sure my hair's looking good and I'm looking okay.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
definitely an interesting take, and I do realize that a lot has changed in the past years. So, moving on from that, it seems like you're always constantly meeting new people and different people from different sectors of the industry and even different walks of life. So, is there any sort of anxiety when you're first approaching them or being approached by them where you don't know anything about them? So, like, for example, like I think for graduates, it's difficult to really approach people because there's this anxiety and imposter syndrome in a sort of way. So, how do you overcome that? Like, how do you overcome just meeting new people and instantly connecting with them?
I always worry that if I'm going to meet someone, whether it's going to be a waste of time or not, because I'm just so conscious about how limited time we have to do anything now. And I try and put myself in your shoes as an allocator and say, okay, if you go into a meeting with someone, you may know in 5 minutes you're not going to invest in that fund, but you have to kind of give that person an hour of time so you can let them sort of talk about who they are, what they're doing, and all the rest of it. So I try and look at that and think about that. The anxiety actually follows in the follow up. It comes in the follow up where if someone's constantly hounding you because they want to get your attention, and you can either ignore it for a certain period of time, but I try not to ignore it unless it becomes annoying, and try and say, look, I think there's nothing to do here or nothing to speak about. I don't know if imposter is I don't feel an imposter syndrome. What I feel is it going to be a waste of time or not? In terms of any graduates reaching out to me or young people, I'm always open to that because I think you should always send the elevator back down and help people as much as you can, um, and try and help people learn what you've learned and install sort of values you believe in, and sort of help them navigate this complex universe. And it's getting more and more complex as time passes. What I love doing with young people is telling them how the industry is getting harder and harder and harder, and how it used to be quite easy. And now it's difficult and it's going to get more and more difficult. And they can't believe some of the stories you tell them from back in the day, 20, 25 years ago. So those stories are kind of very interesting to speak to people about, and to also get their perspectives on what they think matters and how things should be thought of, and what opportunities there are out there, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. Are there any anecdotes that you'd like to share with us today?
I am just always thinking about people. I think it's always really important to always focus on individuals, simply because individuals transcend organizations, they move around. So you should focus on those personal relationships. I think that's just so key to everything. It's not, it's really dangerous to put yourself in a hole with someone and then they move organization and you think because they've moved organization you can just pick up the phone and speak to them again. If you haven't treated them well or been kind to them, they're not going to take your call. So what I always think about is, what do I need to do to ensure that person's going to take my call in 20 years time? That's really how I think about it. So if I've had a good relationship with them, even if they're not become a client or an investor, what I care about is that they will still take my call. And that's really what I focus on. So it's really about how you build friendships and relationships. I think about them the same way as building business relationships. When you have relationships with your friends or your family or your colleagues that you like, what do you do to keep that engagement going? I do the same with investors and prospects, write them a card now and then, recognize their achievements, speak to them about things they might be doing, or if they are invested in a manager that you find a fact out about that they may not know, make sure they know about it when you've contacted them, introduce them to other people in your network, help them with things. I don't ever just focus on the manager I'm working with that client on. I always think about what else can I do to help them with their broader job, with their network, with their portfolio. So it's about being relevant to them, even if you're not relevant in terms of your manager, you're relevant to them in terms of their work, their job, their life. So that's kind of how I think about it. It's just human relationships. That's life's about relationships. That's my anecdote for today. I think that's the most important thing to remember always. It's not about products or about firms, it's about people always.
Yeah, makes sense. And I completely agree with that. It's just that as a really junior member of the industry, you can introduce yourself, you can write them a note, but how do you stay in touch? Like, then what? Because you've introduced yourself, you'll have had like an introductory call, but then how do you maintain a relationship and how do you build on it? Because it's just such a base case relationship at that point where you've just spoken once. How do you build it over time and how do you maintain it?
I think you have to think about what they're doing and what you're seeing, or what they're seeing and what you're doing. Where's there a commonality there? Where's there a matching of values, of ideas, of interests? So if you meet them and they talk about stuff, find out who they are, where they've come from, the challenges they've overcome, or the things they've struggled with, or things they're doing in their portfolio, and then see how you might be able to help them. Saying, oh, we were speaking about X, Y, and Z manager. I've just spoken to my guys. We actually did some work with them. We didn't invest because of A, B, and C. Or you said you guys are looking at Japan right now. This is what we've done in Japan. It's just finding ways where you can connect to them. Obviously, I think there's a danger in doing it too frequently, and I think infrequently is much better. People have a tendency to contact people on a regular basis at the same time every month or quarter or whatever, and that's just so robotic. It's not passionate and sincere and individual and much more analog way to do it. So I always try and find ways to connect to people and think about it, or ask them, who on your team is sort of my level that I can speak to, and you can start building a relationship with someone on their team as well, which is a way to sort of stay connected to them and what they're doing via someone who works for them. So I just always think there's interesting ways to do it, but you just have to be patient. This is a long game. Right? It's a long game. Sometimes it can take years to build relationships, but if you're not in a rush, then you can wait and be patient.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable lesson right there. And I think I just learned something from that answer. So I think without taking much of your time, I think I'm going to go to my final question. And that is, I know that you're on a bunch of boards and you have a lot of connections everywhere. So I was just curious if there's like a few events or activities that you'd urge graduates to be a part of, to really set foot in the industry and just be a part of it. So because I know I got to know about Gain through you. So are there any such more events that you'd recommend someone, and have you attended any of these events and have they helped you? So it's just a whole bunch of questions. So the way you want to answer it is good.
So I think when you're young, you should go to as many events as you can, because you never know who you're going to meet, number one. And number two, they're all going to be different and give you different things. So when you're young, go to everything. I used to go to absolutely everything that I could, because you learn, you see, you hear, and you sort of develop an idea of, what's interesting to you, what people are doing, what they're seeing, who you want to be connected with. So I think all of those things are really interesting. And then over time, you determine your interests and what's good for you and where you can add value and where you can learn the most, and then you determine from that what's worth spending time on and what's not worth spending time on. I mean, from an investor perspective, and you'll see definitely all the cap intro events are worth going to, and then sort of more interesting things like iConnections is huge, very, very good, very powerful. Gain in the UK, girls who invest in the US, those sorts of movements are really good and powerful. IADEI, Institutional Allocator for Diversity, Equity, Inclusions, another group, super interesting. 500 institutions now are part of that group, focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. And even if you're not buying into that mandate, it's an interesting way to sort of meet smaller, more niche managers. So I just think anything that you can is always interesting. And then arranging social events, getting together with people and just seeing what they're doing. Do use your network and your tools to sort of bring people together too, because I think doing things off the cuff is always a good way to sort of learn about people and what they're doing and what they're seeing. I did an event last week. I didn't even organize it, but I was actually the only male at the event, and I had to sort of speak about all the diversity, equity, inclusion work that I'd done and why it was important, and what other people, they're all women, could do to get involved in that work. So I think that's always interesting as well.
Got it. So I have one last quick question that I just thought of. It's when you go to these events, what do you do? Because I have been to a bunch of them, and it does really get hard approaching people because it looks like a lot of people already know each other and they're standing in little circles. So what do you do at these events that might help other people to follow the same thing? Because it's just really intimidating and confusing to just be here and you don't have enough information about anything, and people are talking about all of these complex things. So how do you just fit in and get right in and make the most of the event?
I think you can, so when you're standing around, find someone else who's also on their own, because then you've all got a common reason to approach them, because they're also probably lost and they don't have anyone else that they can speak to. That's the first thing. And then with that person, you can then go and approach a bigger group, because you'll feel less intimidated because you've got someone with you, and then they're more likely to open up to you if there's two of you rather than just one of you. So I think that's kind of a good way to sort of break into the smaller groups. And then, if you find someone who works for a firm that you've heard of or are interested about, then, approach them and say, oh, you work for XYZ firm. I've heard amazing things about you guys. What are you up to now? What are you seeing in the market or whatever? Or if it's another allocator, say, oh, guys, you're doing work on this manager, I heard. We're looking at it as well. Can we catch up and talk about it? So you have to always try and find, I was always told, always try and find common ground to build a relationship with someone on. So there must be something that you have of common interest that allows you to have a proper conversation. So
Yeah.
that's what I do. But I think definitely approach someone who's on their own, and then two, you can go and approach groups. Say, no, shall we go and join this group or join that group? And when there's two of you, it's easier to do that.
Okay, that's good advice. So always operate in groups of two. I would say.
Two or three, I mean, but I think you'll feel less intimidated going into a bigger group when you're with at least one more person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think these are a few things that I'm going to start using, and I will get back to you and tell you how it goes because it is so nerve-wracking just entering these events and also intimidating.
Yeah,
But
it is.
yeah, thank you so much for giving me the time today.
That's a
And
pleasure.
on a closing note, is there any other advice that you'd give people who are just starting out into the industry and just to get where you are because you're such an inspiration to me.
No, thank you. Thank you. Just be yourself. I think that's the most important thing. Be yourself. Respect everyone, whether they're more senior than you or junior than you. And just keep learning because it's just everything keeps evolving, and just be open to learning. That's it really. But be yourself and always, treat everyone with respect, really. That's it.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
Pleasure.
your time today.
Pleasure.